I heard a story about a brother and sister, Tamar and Aryeh, who were growing up with loving parents who took care of them, sheltered them, who loved them. And as they grew older, the older brother, Aryeh, he got engaged, got married. It was a big occasion for everyone. And eventually, when Tamar turned 18, mother suggested maybe she wants to start dating and looking for that special someone. And she said, I'm not ready yet. It was okay. I'd like to just, spend more time at home and, studying. And parents don't want to pressure. Of course, everyone in their own time. But as sometimes you might call coincidence, we would call divine providence would have it, tragedy struck. And Tamar and Aryeh's parents were both killed in a sudden car accident. And while Aryeh had the support of his wife and new baby, little Menashe, to comfort him and help him a little bit deal with the loss, Tamar was all alone, and she visited her brother often to try and find solace together with family. And after the mourning period ended and they were able to get back to life, both Tamar and her brother recognized it was a good time to start looking to find her partner, to find her match, her soulmate. And right away, they also both recognized that what about finances? Meaning, who's going to pay for the wedding? And what about establishing a home? And Tamar said, oh, I have an idea. Let's sell our parents' home, and I'll use all that money to help me, with the wedding expenses and building a home. And her brother said, well, actually, I was planning to sell the home and use the money to help cover my massive mortgage and expenses. And essentially, a huge dispute broke out between brother and sister. Each one feeling they were entitled to the full inheritance, and neither one willing to compromise and settle on a 50-50 or any other sort of split. And finally, Aryeh couldn't take it anymore. He said, you know what, you just take all the money. Just take it and go. And with that, they broke contact. And brother and sister were no longer. Family, what was left of the family was now torn apart. And Tamar, at this point, felt she could no longer stay in the community because neighbors were talking, people were talking, and it just didn't look good or feel good. So she moved to Israel, where she told people about the tragedy of losing her parents, but neglected to mention anything about having a brother or the fight with her brother. And the community took her in with open arms, and she actually joined the seminary to study about Torah and spirituality, and started to grow in her spirituality, and got to a point where she really became a wonderful, upstanding girl. And many potential guys were proposed as possible matches. And there was one in particular that she connected with. He was really a tzaddik, a very righteous man, but with no money to his name. So naturally, Tamar felt very justified that she had all this money now because they really needed it. There was no one to pay for the wedding. There was no one to pay to get them established with a home and to start a family. So fortunately for her, she had this money. And her brother heard remotely that she had gotten married, but, certainly wasn't at the wedding. And they still haven't spoken. 20 years later, Aryeh's son, Menashe, is now studying in Israel in yeshiva himself, and he's doing quite well. And during one of the breaks, he and some of his friends go mountain climbing, and they climb to one of these high mountains in Israel, and they're looking around the beautiful sights, taking in the scenery and the sunsets, and just so incredible. And as Menashe is standing on the cliff looking over, he doesn't notice the ground below him starts to shake, and there's a mini avalanche, and he is caught in this avalanche, sending him very far down below. And his friends managed to jump out of the way just in time, and they had cell phones. They called the Israeli army, who sent a helicopter search and rescue team, and they did find him, and they were able to airlift him to a hospital, but he was completely unconscious. And after examining him, the doctor said, you know what, he's physically okay. We don't see any damage, we don't see any brain damage, we don't see any issues. It's just he's not conscious. It would be helpful maybe if his friends came to the hospital and would speak to him and do things in front of him that maybe, he should come back soon. So they all started coming. Days turned to weeks, weeks turned to months, and still no signs of life, no signs of movement, not reacting, responding to anything. And people were beginning to lose hope if he's ever going to respond. It got close to Yom Kippur, and the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of his yeshiva, came to visit and also to make arrangements. He felt it would be very helpful if they had a minyan for Yom Kippur in the hospital room. Maybe you never know what the power of the prayer could do. And when the Rosh Yeshiva came to visit, he noticed a man sitting and crying by the bed. And he asked, who is this? And it turns out it was the boy's father. This was Aryeh, who was sitting and crying by his son's bed. And Aryeh thanked the Rosh Yeshiva for everything he was doing, and they introduced themselves. And when he heard his name, he said, oh, that name sounds, I think my sister married someone with that last name. Maybe you met her, maybe you know her. He said, no, I don't know, but it's not such a common name, so you never know. He said, well, I've never spoken to my sister in 20 years. It's 20 years you haven't spoken to your sister? He says, no. But Shiva said, well, you know what? Maybe now's the time to make peace with her, because that could be a huge merit for your son. We don't know what's wrong with him, when he's going to come back, but maybe that's what's holding things up. If you could find her and make peace with her. And he said, you're right. I really need to do that. Maybe you could help me track her down. Do you know any Tamars who were married, to someone with, with your last name? And she was thinking, the only Tamar I know married to someone with my last name is my own wife, who's Tamar, but she doesn't have any brothers. He says, well, are you sure? She says, yeah. She said, never mentioned anything about her brother. He says, well, did you say anything about her parents? He said, yeah. She told me her parents died in a tragic car accident. At which point, Aryeh said, well, then you're my brother-in-law. She must have not told you about me because of our fight. He says, what fight? She said, we had a fight over the inheritance, and I let her take the money, and we severed ties. We haven't spoken in 20 years. And I've never forgiven her for that. And the Rosh said, 20 years, you never forgave her? He said, no. He said, now I understand. For 20 years, your sister and I have struggled with no children. And there was no medical explanation. No one understood why. Now I'm beginning to understand. Here you have a son who's in a coma. We don't have any children at all. And we have a brother and sister who haven't spoken and can't forgive each other. And the brother said, I want to make this right. Please, let's get together. Rosh Yeshiva contacted his wife, and she said, yes, absolutely. She came right away to the hospital room. They embraced each other. They asked for forgiveness. They forgave each other. And as this commotion was happening and the tears were flowing, the nurses came running in because the lights were lighting up around Menashe, around Aryeh's son. He was somehow coming back to life now, starting to move, starting to show signs of life. And at that point, knowing that clearly the one block that was in their way, the block of not forgiving, of holding a grudge, was finally removed, Aryeh offered a blessing to his brother-in-law and to his dear sister. They should be blessed with a child speedily. And I have no doubt that 9 months later, they probably had that child. We are at a time period now where hatred among Jews has caused devastation, has caused destruction, has caused suffering. perhaps now is the time for us to think about our own relationships. Is there anyone we've perhaps fought with or had a disagreement with? Or maybe we hurt someone else and haven't made peace. We haven't asked for forgiveness. And maybe someone hurt us and we never forgave them. Even if they never asked, perhaps now's the time to search within ourselves and within our hearts and to offer them a 100% full-fledged forgiveness. And in that merit, may God forgive us for all of our sins and bring about world peace. Thank you all so much.